Now let's place some cells in the design. To do that, we need to look at the tools in this Cells toolbox, which is this toolbox. And I'm going to open that as a floated box for convenience sake. Now, before we use the tools, we need to set one of the actual cells as a placement cell. So in the cell library, the Sample2 cell library, and I'm going to minimize that a little bit, click on the North cell so that it highlights, and click on the Placement option so we can place an active cell. Now you can do this one of two ways. You can click on the Placement, and that sets the current cell, or you can double click on the North cell, and that will do exactly the same thing. So a faster method really is to double click the actual cell you want for placement. The other three methods you'll have to select individually. So North is now ready for placement, and to place the cell, we'll use the first tool on the cell toolbox, which is Place Active Cell. So click on that. Look at the tool settings window. The active cell is North, active angle is 0, and we have an X and Y scale of 1. We don't need to change anything, so just bring your cursor onto the screen, and I'm going to zoom down a little bit, and there you'll see the cell attached to your cursor. Now the cell is attached to the cursor at the origin point of the cell, which in this case is the center of the circle. When we get to creating cells ourselves, you'll see how significant the origin is. Now to place the cell, simply data point on the screen, and we leave a copy of the cell behind. You can keep data pointing as many times as you need to place the cell. Right-clicking will stop the action, of course. If you want to experiment a little, place the cell with different X and Y scales and different active angles. Now let's take a look at some more options in the Tool Settings window. Expand the box, and let's see what options we have. True Scale is on, and that's typically left on as a default, because now MicroStation will try and reconcile any difference in working units between the cell itself, when it was first created, and your currently active file. The relative option is a little complex and is normally left off. What it means basically is that it controls how the levels of the elements in a graphic cell are treated when the cell is placed. And I'll talk about graphic cells and point cells shortly. Essentially, if relative is off, the levels of the cell are placed on the same levels in the current design as they were in the reference cell library. This, of course, means adding more levels to your design file, which may be appropriate or not. So when you create a cell, you should think carefully about the levels of the cell. If relative is on, the lowest level of the cell is placed on the active level of the current design, and all other levels of the cell are placed relative to the active level, and MicroStation will use the level numbers to determine the relationships, which gets quite complex. So I would suggest leaving relative off for most operations. We can mirror the cell. We can interactively scale and rotate. The flatten option is really a 3D option. If you're inserting a 3D cell into a 2D drawing, then you would likely want to flatten the elements in the cell to a 2D type of cell. We won't be using that at all in this set of videos. We can scale multi-line offsets. Now, you haven't seen multi-lines yet, but you will in a later video. We can scale dimension values, annotations, and we can make the cell associative, meaning that we can attach the cell to an element, similar to dimensions being associative to elements, which we've covered in a previous video. Now, at this point, you can experiment with the mirror and interactive, and you can experiment with different cells from different libraries, using some of the options as well.